Now, let's delve into the Chicago police torture scandal, a dark chapter in the city's history that continues to haunt its criminal justice system. But how did these horrific acts of torture come to light? Stay with us to find out. From 1972 to 1991, over 110 black men and women were tortured by former Chicago Police Commander John Burge and a ring of white detectives under his command at Area 2 and 3 Police Headquarters in Chicago, Illinois. The torture techniques were brutal and inhumane, including electrically shocking men's genitals, ears and fingers with cattle prods or an electric shock box, suffocating individuals with typewriter covers or plastic garbage bags, mock executions with firearms, beatings with telephone books and rubber hoses, and in one instance, anally raping a man with a cattle prod. But what was the aftermath of these revelations? We'll get to that soon. In addition to inflicting excruciating physical pain, the detectives also routinely tormented the survivors with racist epithets and slurs throughout their interrogations. Daryl Cannon recounts that throughout his interrogation, he no longer had a name and was only known by a racial slur. The electric shock box was commonly referred to by a derogatory name. Detectives threatened to hang Gregory Banks, another torture survivor, making a clear reference to lynchings. But how did the legal system respond to these allegations? Stay tuned. Burge and his men systematically engaged in acts of torture and racist verbal abuse to extract confessions, which were then introduced as powerful pieces of incriminating evidence at scores of survivors' trials to secure their convictions and, in 11 cases, to obtain their death sentences. In the vast majority of these cases, the survivors complained about the torture and abuse they suffered at the hands of Burge and his men in their criminal proceedings, seeking to suppress their confessions on the basis that they were physically coerced in violation of their 5th and 14th Amendment rights. They courageously testified at hearings before judges and later before juries, laying bare the details of their painful, terrifying, humiliating, and degrading interrogations. At each of these proceedings, the detectives routinely and cavalierly denied under oath that any torture or coercion occurred. Judges and juries routinely credited the word of white police detectives over those of black torture survivors, facilitating the admission of these confessions in the criminal proceedings. The first case of torture that garnered significant publicity was that of Andrew Wilson. Wilson was accused of killing 2 white Chicago police officers, William Fahey and Richard O'Brien, on February 9, 1982. Shortly after the police officers were shot on the street, the Chicago Police Department launched a vicious manhunt to capture those responsible, during which scores of African-American homes on the South Side were ransacked. People were stopped and frisked on the street, and several young black men were dragged into police headquarters and tortured to learn the whereabouts of the prime suspect, Wilson. In a world where power is unchecked, where authority silences dissent and justice turns a blind eye, who holds them accountable? This is Corruption Chronicles, where we pull back the curtain on police corruption, abuse of power, and the lives shattered in its wake. On February 14, 1982, Wilson was found, arrested, and transported to Area 2 Police Headquarters, where Burge and others handcuffed him across a hot radiator in an interrogation room. The officers then electrically shocked Wilson's ears, lip, genitals, back, and fingers with the electric shock box, causing him to flinch and sustain burns to his chest, thighs, and chin from the radiator. The detectives also used a plastic garbage bag to suffocate him, beat him about the head and body, and burned him with a cigarette. After Wilson confessed, he was transported to Cook County Jail, where, for the first time since his interrogation, he received a full physical examination and medical treatment for his injuries. Dr. John Raber, the head of the medical unit, noted that Wilson sustained several physical injuries, including a battered right eye, bruises, swelling, and abrasions on his face and head, and blisters on his right thigh, cheek, and chest that were consistent with radiator burns. Unlike so many of the other torture survivors, whose torture was concealed by methods that intentionally left no marks, Wilson sustained visible injuries, providing irrefutable proof that he was tortured. Troubled, Raber wrote to the superintendent of the CPD, Richard J. Brzechek, demanding that Brzechek conduct an investigation into Wilson's allegations of electric shock and physical abuse. Brzechek, in turn, wrote to the head of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, who, back in 1982, was Richard M. Daley, who later became Chicago's longest-serving mayor. Brzechek forwarded Braber's letter to Daly and informed him that he would not conduct an investigation into Wilson's allegations of torture and abuse unless advised to do so by Daly, expressing a desire not to interfere with Daly's prosecution of Wilson for the murders of Fahey and O'Brien. Daly and his office never responded to Brzezicek's letter, and neither Daly nor Brzezicek conducted an investigation into allegations of torture or the officer's crimes. Instead, Daly and his staff repeatedly denied Wilson was tortured, successfully opposed his motion to suppress his confession, and, in successfully doing so, used Wilson's confession against him to convict him and obtain a death sentence. As a result of Daly and Brzezicek's refusal to take any action whatsoever, at least 70 more black men were tortured by Burge and men under his command over a 20-year period. Wilson subsequently filed a pro-SE federal civil rights lawsuit seeking vindication for the torture he endured and sought the assistance of lawyers to represent him. Despite the unpopularity of Wilson's cause, Jeffrey Haas, John Stainthorpe, and Flint Taylor of the People's Law Office, PLO, agreed to represent him. In the course of the civil litigation, the PLO received letters from an anonymous police source, subsequently dubbed Deep Badge, who disclosed a wealth of information about torture practices under Burge's command at Area 2, including names of officers who engaged in torture, nicknaming them Burge's ass kickers. Deep Badge also identified Melvin Jones as a man who was tortured by Burge only 9 days before Wilson's interrogation. Following Deep Badge's leads, Haas, Stainthorpe, and Taylor tracked down 25 other black men who alleged they were tortured at Area 2 police headquarters, confirming that Wilson's torture was not an isolated incident, but simply one instance in a larger racist pattern and practice of torture. This was powerful evidence to corroborate Wilson's allegations and that have been admitted pursuant to FEDREVID 404B at his civil rights trial. The judge, presiding over Wilson's civil proceedings, however, would not admit this relevant and damning evidence. Instead, the judge allowed Burge's defense counsel to present a slew of irrelevant evidence relating to the murders of Fahey and O'Brien. Consequently, Wilson did not prevail in the trial court. While Wilson was seeking to vindicate his rights in federal court, scores of Burge torture survivors were literally fighting for their lives behind bars. At the time of Burge's termination from the CPD in 1993, there were 10 known Burge torture survivors on Illinois' death row. These men were seeking relief from criminal convictions and death sentences in appeals and post-conviction petitions, arguing that there was a pattern and practice of torture within the CPD, citing Burge's termination and the findings made in the Office of Professional Standards Goldston report as strong corroboration of their allegations that their confessions were physically coerced. Yet, they were routinely denied relief by the circuit courts and Illinois Supreme Court, despite this new, game-changing evidence. Throughout the continuing saga of the Chicago police torture cases, the legal system failed the survivors and community every step of the way. The courts failed to stop Burge and others from torturing black men and women for decades, or prevent the use of their coerced confessions to obtain wrongful convictions. State and federal prosecutors failed to hold Burge and other detectives fully accountable for their crimes and international human rights violations. The civil legal system was not designed to provide the holistic redress needed by all of those harmed by Burge and his men. What do you think about the Chicago police torture scandal? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because truth is a weapon more powerful than any badge. Together we uncover the stories they don't want you to hear and fight for accountability, one truth at a time. If you stand for accountability and justice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can shine a light on the truth and ensure no abuse goes unchallenged.